From the 11 Alive studios, this is The Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Good morning and welcome to The Georgia Vote on location here at the state capitol. Zach is off this week and we're preparing to move towards crossover day in the state legislature. That's coming up on Thursday. Crossover Day is the deadline for a bill to pass out of its original chamber in order to be considered by the other chamber before session ends. We're going to talk about all of the key issues under the Gold Dome in the next 30 minutes with my guest, Democratic State Senator Harold Jones II, the Senate Minority Leader, and Senate Majority Leader Republican Steve Gooch. Joining us is Senator Steve Gooch, the Senate Majority Leader. Thank you so much, Senator, for being here. We appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Faith.
So we're looking ahead to crossover day. We know that the Senate has been very busy. Last time you spoke with my colleague, Zach Merchant, prior to the election. Now we are well in second month of the Trump administration. And then here in Georgia, we know that things have been very busy under the building that we are in right now. What is your top priority going into crossover day?
It's a great question, and next week is going to be a really busy week. We have hundreds of bills that are floating around the building in committees and on the floor of the Senate. We just picked about 15 bills that'll be on the floor for Monday afternoon. And then, of course, Tuesday will be the last day before crossover. Crossover is going to be on Thursday. That'll be the busiest day of our session so far. We'll probably pass 40 or 50 bills on Thursday. Some of our big priorities this year we've already taken care of, obviously, and that's boys and girls sports. We're cutting income taxes this year again for the third year in a row. We're reducing some of the surplus in our reserve that we've had built up. There's $16 billion in that state reserve. We're sending a lot of that money back to the hardworking Georgians, people who pay income taxes every year. We're working really hard this year in the Senate and working with the House and the leadership of Governor Kemp to help the victims of Hurricane Helene. And we've spent a lot of time working on policy and funding to send help back to South Georgia. They were devastated last year, one of the biggest storms that's ever hit Georgia, from all the way from Augusta to Valdosta, literally billions of dollars of damage on private property and public properties. And we're still cleaning that mess up. It's going to take months, if not years, to recover from that. And so those are some of the big things they're working on, and there'll be others as we continue through the cycle.
Governor Kemp's, one of his, if not his biggest priority for this session, which is tort or litigation reform. We know that he has taken a hardline approach to senators. Why do you think this is so important? Of course, you voted to pass this through.
Well, I'm glad you asked about tort reform. Lawsuit reform is important. We've recognized it now for over 5 years in the Senate. We've led on this issue multiple years. We started out 5 or 6 years ago with a study committee traveling the state, and we were listening to businesses, small and large, trying to understand what can we do to make Georgia more competitive and continue to be the number one state to do business. And the one issue that kept coming back to us time after time from all over the state was the cost of insurance premiums and the cost of litigation from especially frivolous lawsuits. And lawsuits are expensive. From the time you hire an attorney, whether you're the plaintiff or the defendant, until the time you get through a jury trial, could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a lot of these cases that we've seen are considered nuclear verdicts, where victims who do deserve compensation, who are victims from an unfortunate injury, sometimes get more than they're needed. The House will vet the bill properly. They'll put it on the floor for a debate, and then it may have to come back over to the Senate for a final approval. So I hope by then we'll have more support from the Democrat Party.
I want to talk about the bill, the known as Doge Light. When people hear the word Doge, they think of Elon Musk, they think of federal cuts. Can you assure state workers in Georgia that that is not going to happen here in Georgia with this bill?
Sure. Our bill simply wants to cut red tape. It wants to reduce unnecessary regulations that have been put on the books decades ago that may not be needed anymore. A lot of the laws that we pass here go on the books, and we never go back and look and say, was the bill effective? Did it carry out its mission? And furthermore, with technology advancements and changes that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years, is it necessary to have the same policies and procedures and regulations that we may have adopted decades ago? And so simply this bill just says every 4 years, agency heads and commissions have to go through their regulations regulations, scrub their books, look at ways to try to reduce the burden on a small business owner or a homeowner or a small business, in a small town. Try to pass that efficiency on to the customer. If we can make a business more efficient, we make it more profitable. Therefore, the consumer can benefit from that as well by lowering the cost of goods to that consumer.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much.
One of the big news stories under the Gold Dome this past week, and something senators will soon tackle: protections for in vitro fertilization. The House passed an IVF protection bill on Thursday. State Representative Lehman Franklin of Statesboro sponsored this bill to protect IVF after his wife Lori, who was in the House chamber, had used IVF successfully. Members of both parties got behind Franklin and his bill.
And now my wife is pregnant with a little girl, and we're ecstatic about it. Thank you.
This is a moment for us to come together and to see families in real time as they try to family make in many different ways.
Joining us is State Senator Harold Jones II, the Senate Minority Leader. Thank you so much, Senator Jones, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
So we are looking ahead to crossover day. I want to ask you right now, what is your biggest priority this session?
One of our priorities has been health care. That's what our big priority. So we have SB 50, which is Medicaid expansion. We still hope to get that over the finish line. Last year, we actually did have a vote on it, so we're hoping to get that over the finish line. We're also looking at a couple of other things within healthcare. We have a bill that's actually pending that would codify the ACA as far as preventative services are concerned. It would actually be covered, preventative hospital services or preventative services. Another bill that we're actually looking at is to codify the premium tax credits that exist on the federal level. What that does is it allows people to use those tax credits to actually go on the marketplace as far as healthcare is concerned. The concern is that the federal government, with everything that's happening up there, they may not continue those tax credits, and if they do not, people who right now are using private insurance and are able to afford private insurance on the marketplace, they won't be able to afford that. So we're thinking about codifying here on the state level those tax credits so people can continue to receive their health insurance.
Another big bill that has, at least part one of it, has passed the Senate right now. That is Governor Brian Kemp's priority legislation for tort or litigation reform. We know that at least Senate Bill 68 is going to move over to the House. Senate Bill 69 is still up for discussion right now. But what are your thoughts on it as that bill heads over to the House?
We realize that there's actually an issue, especially with premises liability. So the Georgia Senate Democrats, we actually created our own premises liability bill, SB 223, and we're hoping that the House kind of uses that as a model. We don't think the governor's bill actually covers people the way it should. And what we mean by that is this. We actually have an intersection of interests. We have business owners that want their insurance rates to go down, but we also have customers that need to be safe when they go to actually shop at that particular business. We think our bill actually accomplished that goal because it would tell business owners, if you keep your premises safe, you then will get a rebuttable presumption against liability that can only be overcome by clear and convincing evidence. What does that mean? That means that a frivolous suit would not be able to make it over that hurdle, but a meritorious suit could. So it means frivolous suits that raise insurance prices, they would go away. Meritorious suits would still be eligible, but the bottom line is your customers would be safe. We think that was the perfect marriage and intersection between those two interests. Unfortunately, the governor did not agree, but of course that is in the House. So we're hoping the House actually uses the model that we created and possibly amend that particular bill.
Do you think that your bill has the legs to go against the governor's bill? He has really kind of put a message out to Senate Republicans and House members that if you don't pass this, this is going to be an issue.
Well, the question is, do we actually want to protect the customers or not? I think that's the key question. We don't believe that his bill does that. So if it gets a good hearing in the House, we think it will be obvious to everyone that our bill actually accomplishes that. It can lower the rates, but at the same time, it can protect the consumer.
Where do you see gun legislation standing in the Senate? We know that there are 2 or even 3 or 4 sides to every coin when you're talking about this issue. But where do you think it stands for you?
One of the things, of course, we understand that there's a right to ownership of gun. We also want to make sure they're safe. And so we have a gun storage bill that is actually out there that we're hoping to push forward. It's actually a common sense particular bill to basically have safe gun storage. And we don't see why anyone would not get behind that particular piece of legislation. And so we would hope that that legislation could move forward. If it does not move forward for crossover, of course, there's always opportunities after that to actually still move legislation forward. So we think there should be a balance. Yes, absolutely, persons have a right to defend themselves. We have no issue with that, but we also want to make sure we have gun safety, and we have legislation to promote that. Another thing we've actually looked at as far as the area of domestic violence. In Georgia, on the federal level, you're not supposed to own a firearm as far as being convicted of domestic violence. Unfortunately, that's not been codified from a state perspective. We've actually had bills to do that too. So when you start talking about actually protecting the public, whether it's red flag laws, Democrats have led on that. When you start talking about protecting victims of domestic violence, Democrats have led on that, and the court also safe storage laws. So we've led on this particular issue. We think Republicans ought to not keep listening to the gun lobby and actually embrace common sense legislation.
Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Senator. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
While we know things are busy here at the state capitol, they are always busy in Washington, D.C., especially as we begin the second month of the Trump administration. We know border security was a top priority for many voters in 2024. In a one-on-one interview, the Georgia Vote's Zach Merchant asked Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff whether he thinks President Trump's approach is the right one.
The Trump administration is now in office. They've pushed for, and they say they've enacted widespread immigration enforcement efforts. We've seen some of those arrests happen here in Metro Atlanta. Do you support that approach?
Georgians and the American people want, demand, and deserve a secure border. And the Biden administration failed to secure the border. I don't believe that the American people want federal police raids on churches and hospitals and elementary schools, and the mass roundup of people who are otherwise following the law that leads to the separation of families or the orphaning of children.
Zach's full interview with the senator is streaming right now on 11 Alive Plus. We'll take a quick break and we'll return with our Politics Roundtable. And later, our voice of the voter, a couple who helps those looking for a new home, what they are watching from the Trump administration that has a direct impact on their business. Time now for our Politics Roundtable. Joining us today are Republican strategist and pollster Mark Roundtree, the founder and president of Landmark Communications based right here in Atlanta. Democratic strategist Howard Franklin, who leads the consulting firm Ohio River South. And making her first appearance on the Georgia Vote, Shannon McCaffrey from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thank you all so much for joining panel here under the Gold Dome as we are moving ahead towards crossover day. Shannon, I want to start with you just from your expertise, your sources. What are you hearing as we move towards crossover day?
There's a few things that have been notable about this session, and I think we've been hearing a lot about. One is how closely the bills and the priorities this session align with President Donald Trump's. There have been some of these have been issues that Georgia Republicans have had on their radar for a long time, but we're certainly seeing them get a fresh look this session. We've got things like immigration, fentanyl. There's even a religious liberty bill floating around. I think the second thing that's notable is the focus on the transgender issue. We've seen transgender sports bills pass in both chambers. There's a puberty blocker bill, and there's also a state health benefits plan bill. So that has just been an issue that has really galvanized Republicans. And just last, I'll mention that the governor's legislative overhaul, a lot of people call it tort reform. We don't call it tort reform for a few reasons, because reform implies good, and we don't have an opinion on whether it's good or bad. But that is not the sexiest bill this session, but it has the potential to really make a huge amount of difference with lawyers, with businesses, with insurance companies. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. It's the governor's top priority.
Why is there such a hardline approach to try to get this thing passed? As Shannon was saying, I mean, this is kind of not a sexy topic. It's a little inside baseball, but why this push?
There are a lot of constituencies that are affected by this. It's not just businesses and attorneys and insurance companies. But interestingly, from a campaign political point of view, the group that's not terribly affected so much are going to be simply regular voters. Regular voters are really not keeping up with this sort of issue. Tort reform with a combat between sort of the insurance companies, maybe personal attorneys, things like that. These are the groups that are going to be affected. So this really affects the donor class more than the retail campaign side of things.
You know, Howard, I've heard some critics of the bill, some are lawyers, right? Of course. They could miss out on a payday if this passes. Is this going to be an uphill battle in the House?
Well, I think the House does have a number of attorneys. I think it will get a very close hearing in the House. I think the in large part because the body is just larger, and you've got folks from different walks of life. 180 members means you'll get some diverse points of view. I think it will be a very difficult fight no matter what. I think the trial the Trial Association has had a lot of success explaining why many of the proposals that come forward won't actually improve the lives of Georgians. To Mark's point, right? There's a lot of messaging and maybe narrative about the cost of insurance going up, and I don't think folks would argue with that. But I think the cost of many things have gone up. Tort reform, or whatever we're calling it, I don't think is necessarily a solution or going to turn back the hands of time in terms of what we pay for our premiums in Georgia. We'll see. And I think that's been one of the more salient arguments made against House Bill 68 in particular.
Are there any specific bills you're keeping a close eye on that have either passed or could pass in this next week leading up to crossover day? We can just go right down the line.
I'm happy to start as the contract lobbyist here. One thing that I found very interesting this session, there are a number of industries that are not very well known or that have gotten a tremendous amount of ink where proposals to regulate them have come forward. I think about data centers in particular. And I'd say similarly, investor-backed single-family rental companies. Again, full disclosure, we represent one. There's been a tremendous amount of interest kind of out of the blue. A couple bills last year about habitability, et cetera, but not on the asset class and who can own how many properties. And then we got 3 sort of out of the gate early in this General Assembly. And to me, there's a little bit of juxtaposition. You don't see other industries that have gotten a lot of attention, a lot of media attention, like artificial intelligence, seeing nearly as much in the way of regulation. So I do find it interesting to watch that dichotomy.
Okay, that's the lobbyist perspective. Let's get the journalist perspective.
Well, he talked about a lot of things that actually impact people's bottom line. I'm going to go with something purely political. So on Friday, the state Senate announced that there would be a resolution to allow the state Senate Committee on Investigations to investigate former Democratic gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. Now, this panel was already investigating Fani Willis. There's a fight going on right now about whether the subpoenas they've issued for her to appear are valid or not. So we have not seen the DA appear, but we have seen others appear. Stacey Abrams has not said whether she's planning to run for governor again, and Burt Jones, who is also a likely candidate for governor, is behind this. So is he trying to take out a rival? We'll see, but it's going to be an interesting political fight.
Let me jump in here and just say to that point, Shannon, I agree with you, and I think this legislative inquiry has as much likelihood to push her into the governor's race. I think Stacey Abrams has shown over the years that when you attack her or she feels attacked by things that are happening in this building, she is going to make her voice heard. But I do think that it could very well spur her into action.
I think I have to disagree with you there. I think this is probably a pretty serious thing that she's facing. I think if she knows that this is going to be a continued conversation over her personal involvement with the potential illegalities that were involved, they've already been found guilty by the Ethics Commission and pled guilty. I think this probably is a pretty serious salvo to come over her ship.
And what are you looking at, Mark?
We're looking a lot at sanctuary cities, at that particular one. I do think that the Republicans, this particular cycle of the legislative session, have been very effective at picking pretty strong issues that will help them in the election now.
We'll take a pause right there. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. Our Politics Roundtable is back for what we like to call our speed round, and I'm going to leave it for you guys, 30 seconds apiece. We are almost here to crossover date on Thursday. What do you think is going to pass? What do you think is going to fail?
I just, as a larger question, I know the snow days impacted how much capacity the members had to actually push legislation forward. They ended up having to put some of those makeup days during budget season. And so I think there's just a tremendous amount of demand to get some bills heard. And before we get to Thursday, I think there's a lot of folks with leadership who haven't heard their bills actually heard yet.
So still some time.
Still some time, yeah.
Okay, how about you?
I'm really curious to see if the transgender issue will go beyond sports, whether they would take up things like whether they should be in the state health benefit plan. It seems to be a really good issue for Republicans. They have run on it and run successfully on it, but I wonder how far they can go without turning people off.
I think this has been a very strong legislative session so far for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. I think he comes out probably at the moment, it looks like he's going to be the preeminent winner of what sort of comes out of this session so far in terms of electoral politics next year.
Our greatest gratitude for coming down to the Capitol for this show. We truly appreciate it and hope to have you all back. Shannon, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. And with that, we will send it back to break, and we will see our voice of the voter on the other side of the commercial. We'll see you there. We say this each and every week. You can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. And this week's Voice of the Voter takes us to Fayette County for a husband and wife duo who's always on the move while trying to help people who are trying to move.
Come on in. This is actually the main living area. They have some beautiful doors. They didn't spare any cost. Sometimes people don't do hardwood steps, but they actually did here. Of course, we have the elevator here.
Everything around here looks pretty brand new.
Yeah, everything is really brand new, maybe a couple of years old.
It's overlooking Trillis Studios.
Yes, it is. So they have
see the studios.
Yeah, you can see the studio. They're building a multi-million-dollar movie theater also.
What does the typical home buyer in this area look like?
Actually, I can say it looks like young actors that you see on some of your big shows to people that are in their 70s, and they come over here and they might buy one of those.
Who are some of the people that you all have worked with?
So Safari. Young Jack and Kendra, Pinky with Slutty Vegan and her husband, Derek Case.
Big Dave Cheesesteak.
There's a new presidential administration in right now. How is that impacting you all here in Georgia?
Well, I know there's plenty of talk about the real estate market, and so the biggest thing are the interest rates. Are the interest rates going to change? So that's supposed to open up. So we'll just see, hopefully the interest rates do go down, and then hopefully we have more of what we call, instead of affordable homes, attainable homes, because we want to make sure that everyone that wants to be a homeowner can afford a home.
What are you most concerned about in the world right now?
Some of the changes that are being put in place is not for everyone. Changes that are being made, I hope that they're changes that's going to be for the betterment of everyone. So I'm concerned that there's going to be more division in the world.
Now let's flip the script. What are you all most optimistic and hopeful about?
The interest rates change, and I know we talked about it, but I just feel like that could change the world right now. So I'm optimistic that the person that's in charge of our country right now is in real estate, so maybe that will push him to get these interest rates lowered so the world can get back to where it was in regards to real estate.
And I would say outside of real estate, I'm optimistic about the younger generation finding their voice and being more vocal.
Right.
So there's a way to be vocal and to, protest in a positive way for change. And I'm really optimistic about that generation really speaking up for things that, they feel like it's right and that they want to happen in this world.
Thank you so much for watching us today from the state capitol. We hope to see you back here next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.